have regional lander elections today. And of course, the headlines are dominated by the real prospect of the AfD, Alternative for Germany, doing extremely well, maybe emerging as the leading party in Thuringia. It's neck and neck, apparently, at least in terms of opinion polls in Saxony. This is in the east of Germany, the former GDR, of course. And indeed, if you actually look at the opinion polls, there is even the possibility of the present, I don't know, would you call it a traffic light coalition? I think that's what they call it. But the SDP, Green, Free Democrat governing alliance being humiliated in the polls and perhaps even being knocked out in one or maybe even two regional elections. Who knows? Either way, I think myself that we need to understand, what's going on here. Clearly, there's a reaction to migrants. I think that that's impossible to ignore. Under the CDU, the Christian Democrat government, Angela Merkel, I don't know the exact number of Syrian and Afghan refugees that were given entry into Germany, but 500,000, that sort of figure rings a bell. It could have been more, but that also goes hand in hand with a history of the former GDR basically being the poor part of Germany, and the fact that the German powerhouse has been the sick man of Europe for a whole number of years now. And if you add on top of that the Ukraine war, where it isn't simply a question of Germany sending, Leopard 2 tanks and other such armaments, but more a question, far more of a question, of its whole, how should I put it, energy strategy being completely destroyed by the Ukraine war. So we had the demand from the United States that no more contracts for cheap oil and gas. And the matter was, of course, decided by those four bombs deep in the Baltic, apparently, I don't believe it, carried out by some divers from Ukraine. I'm very skeptical myself about that story. Either way, we don't have Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 operating anymore, and therefore Germany has been denied cheap Russian oil, but crucially cheap Russian gas, and has to buy its oil and gas on the international market. And clearly the prices that its industries are having to pay are significantly higher, and therefore, of course, its industries are less competitive than they once were, which of course has an effect on the whole of Europe, not least the German economic zone, which includes, Poland, the Czech Republic, Austria, the Netherlands. That whole area really is, when it comes to industry, when it comes to the economy, to all intents and purposes, part of a greater German economic space. There are those, of course, who blame Germany for giving up nuclear power. I think they phased out their last nuclear power station last year, 23. I'm not convinced by that one either. I personally prefer it's Ukraine stupid and the general capitalist downturn that we've seen since the financial crisis, but also the COVID crisis. World capitalism hasn't bounced back from that. And if there is any bounce back going on, I would argue that that's in the United States, and that's to do with its arms industry acting as a stimulus, not only in terms of supplying vast amounts of armaments to Ukraine, but generally, ramping up NATO arms spending. They call it defense spending. American demands of 2%, 2.5% of GDP being spent on the so-called defense of NATO. Okay, I think it's also just worthwhile adding in, having talked about Thuringia and Saxony, the third party when it comes to opinion polls, because I have to say, I was listening to a BBC report the other day, and I have to say that I went, what? To the reporter who was describing the Sarah Wagenaar Alliance. What a name of an organization, by the way. Even George Galloway doesn't name his, Workers' Party of Britain, the Workers' Party of George Galloway. Either way, this party is running third. This is in the former landers in ex-GDR. So, for example, in Thuringia, it's on 17%. That compares with the CDU's 22% and the AFD's 30%. So the BSW, as I will call Sarah's alliance, is ahead of the left party, De Linke, and way ahead of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party, the leading party in the present traffic light coalition government in Berlin. My own take is that the BSW is much more of a German version, or maybe it should be the other way around. Maybe George Galloway's Workers' Party of Britain is a British version of the BSW. Either way, I would describe it as a left-wing organization. Plenty of criticisms there. I'm not saying it's left-wing and therefore you praise it. I simply wouldn't characterize it as the same sort of organization as, for example, Alternative for Germany, or for that matter, the CDU. It's clearly from the left. Wasn't Sarah the sort of leading personality in the left party, former leader of the communist platform, if I'm not mistaken, in De Linke? Someone who has a bit of nostalgia for the former GDR. No, I would describe her as a left-winger. And perhaps this is something that we should watch very carefully, because it would seem to me that if you have success in Germany, not just for the AfD, but also for the BSW, there will be those that will want to emulate it. Well, clearly there's plenty of emulators or people who have already been there before when it comes to the far right gaining respectability. All we need to do is think about the government that today exists in Rome, the former MSI, the former fascists, the Brotherhood of Italy and Maloney. But also, I think there could easily be those that want to emulate the BSW in other parts of Europe and indeed globally. And just on that, it's worthwhile looking at some articles written in the Morning Star not least those that are coming from the former straight leftist faction, who are making, how should you put it, approving noises, I'll put it no stronger than that, of the BSW. And in other words, if they can do it, we can do it. And the formula is clear. So-called left wing, I mean, take that as you will, that's basically Keynesian economic policies, tax the rich, nationalization, subsidies, it's that sort of agenda, but tough on migration and tough on law and order. So where, for example, the CPB clearly hasn't succeeded, maybe a reinvented CPB, maybe a greater Workers' Party of Britain, maybe an expanded Galloway Party, I don't know. But the reason I'm saying it is not because I'm looking forward to such a prospect. I'm basically saying it because I fear such a prospect. We need to be fighting such a prospect, and we ain't going to fight. We're not going to be successful in fighting that if we simply issue scare warnings. We've actually got to build a viable alternative on solid programmatic foundations, i.e., while I think, for example, Stand Up to Racism played a very useful role in terms of the recent riots, clearly that's not enough. Clearly we need a party, and clearly we need an internationalist perspective. We need, in short, a communist party, not some unpopular or semi-popular, but a popular front. We don't need a popular front, and we certainly don't need a BSW or a George Galloway. I would say myself that when it comes to alternative, I would be very wary about saying put it into government on a regional level. I'm not suggesting that you're advocating voting for it or anything like that, but I think we should be very careful because I do think that there is a general shift to the right in global politics. And all we need to do is look to the south in terms of Austria, look to the west and the Netherlands, look to the south in terms of Italy to see the right gaining ground, and also in that sense going from being we can't touch them outsiders to part of the system. And precisely the danger is you end up with an Italy of where the far right is the leading element. And for example, in Italy, I don't think it's called the Northern League anyway, but the Liga sort of becomes marginalized. I mean, a right-wing force, of course, but it's the Brotherhood of Italy that, at least at the present, are the central element in the coalition government. Now, that, I agree with you, doesn't mean fascism, but it does mean life for the left becoming more dangerous. It does mean life for migrants becoming more dangerous. It does mean life for sexual minorities becoming more dangerous. The position of women much more orientated, I would guess, to having babies and not taking men's jobs and stuff like that. Women's rights have gone far enough. So as a general pushback, I think there's a real danger there of the far right. As to Delinka, I absolutely agree. I mean, our approach is don't take up government unless you're the majority, unless you've actually got a realistic prospect of carrying out your full minimum program. And of course, our full minimum program is a lot more radical than Delinka's. Either way, precisely as in Germany, okay, at a regional, federal level, there they are in government making all these hard decisions. And just like, Labour governments in Britain and, social democratic governments, in terms of the history of Europe, what they end up doing is very quickly betraying their own voters, the people that put them into government, and therefore creating demoralization. And I haven't studied where people go, and I'm not suggesting that it's an easy formula that, having voted De Linke in previous years, people are now voting AFD. Usually what happens, and again, we'd have to study the statistics to find out after the election, usually what happens is that former supporters decide to stay at home. That's my understanding, for example, of Italy, with former supporters of the Communist Party, former supporters of the Democratic left, former supporters of, for that matter, it became the Democrat Party. They stay at home. So, for example, in Italy, overall turnout has dramatically gone down. Now, I don't know whether that's the case in Germany, but it's that sort of effect. So why should people vote for you? All you can promise is to be a lesser of two evils. Hardly inspiring, and especially when the lesser of two evils turns out to still, of course, be by definition an evil. Just quickly, in terms of both the BSW and Alternative for Germany. Of course, you could repair Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 very quickly. That's simply a political decision. You'd have to agree, of course, with Russia. You'd have to stand up to the United States, but it could be done. It could be done very quickly. Just on the AFD and De Linke. I mean, I don't know what their programs say, but I'll just say that it all depends on what you're promising. And if you're promising guns and butter, that's one thing. You might then say, well, that's incompatible and we've had to choose guns. On the other hand, you have had governments, not least in Germany, that have made the choice, well, it's one or the other. You can get people to vote for austerity, but you have to be honest. And I don't know about AFD. I suspect what it will say is that it's all these migrants still coming in. It's the government still running the Ukraine war. It's got its excuse already, hasn't it? Anyway, I don't know. I'm just really warning that we shouldn't imagine, for example, if it won in Saxony or wherever it happens to be and forms the core of a government, who knows with who, you have to have coalition partners, then it's automatically going to go into a crisis. I'm cautious. I mean, I obviously don't know, but I'm cautious on that one.